All right, we're live now.
All right.
All right, so I generally give a couple of minutes just to get people in the front door, so it's not just the two of us having a conversation like two kids on a tin can and string.
Okay.
So, but that is an impressive collection you've got there. I'm really impressed with the Marine Corps whites you've got.
I got my first pair of those from Gwen Phillips.
Okay.
I bought her old pair, and then I picked up another set in a grouping. I had her whites, her peanut suit, her peppermints, and her winter green. So it was a pretty complete one.
Wow. That's about as complete as they come.
Yep. Bought it off of one of my girls who quit the hobby, who bought it at a garage sale for a $5 bag buy.
Ugh.
Central Ohio.
Those deals don't come. That's a deal you write home about.
Yeah, I paid a lot more than $5 for it, though. I think she paid for her wedding with what I paid.
Jeez, man. Yeah, that was so. I had little to no experience with American stuff until I got back in the hobby, and I knew Brit had always been kind of hard but doable if you were willing to pay the exchange rate. But when I started poking around with American stuff, I was just gobsmacked at how much it had gone up since the last time I remembered looking at it, and how hard it was to get too. It wasn't just that; there were pieces of uniform that just didn't exist anymore.
I was surprised at the difference between when I stepped back to have the girls and when I came back in, how much more expensive it's gotten.
Like I remember at the height of Diana and I's collecting, so we're talking 09 to 2013. The post office was taking bets on where the next package from overseas we had ordered something was coming in from. And I remember when I got back in it in 19, just for giggles, to go on some of the old military sites we used to look at and price everything. And what we were paying back 10 years before for human-sized uniforms were now what the going rate for sock puppet-sized ones were.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, we got a few viewers have trickled in. We're gonna start this off. This was supposed to be our initial or our inaugural, but we've probably saved one of the best for last, ladies and gentlemen. We have Sarah Westrick on with us tonight. I've known Sarah going back. God, it's going to be 20 years.
2005, 2006?
Yeah, it's going on 20 years at this point.
Easily.
Yeah. But Sarah is just, I can't say enough nice things about Sarah. She's one of the OG female reenactors in the hobby. She's a experienced collector, just a wealth of knowledge, both from the collecting and the living history standpoint. So I want to welcome her on here today. So we'll start off with the obvious, the basic name, rank, and serial number questions. Tell us a little bit about your background, both the living history and the collecting side of things, and how did you get interested in U.S. women's stuff in World War II?
I started reenacting about middle school because my mother told me I had to do something over the summer. The classic Italian mother, I can't stand to look at your face anymore. You got to go outside. So I did. I went to Fort Meigs State Memorial in Perrysburg, and I started volunteering there. I did 1812 reenacting for a couple of years. They had a timeline event every year, and they had a group of boys show up my age that did World War II. I'd always been interested in World War II. I had two great uncles that served. I just did a deep dive into both their backgrounds and found out these men were phenomenal, but I had no idea. But they served in the Navy and they served in the Air Corps. Love them. Love hearing their stories and everything. So I was always fascinated by that. And then the women's stuff, I love photography and had always known about Margaret Burke White's art photography. So that was my first kind of venture, was into the war correspondent thing, because that wasn't being done hardly at all. I think there was one woman out east, because I started in Toledo area. So there's one woman out east kind of exploring it, but there's really no women doing it. And I'm talking about 1997, 98, when I started doing this kind of research. The Nancy Caldwell Sorrell book had just come out. I read that cover to cover like 3 or 4 times. I put together my impression. I think the first event I went to was Lowell, Indiana, with that group of boys I met at Fort Meigs at their muster on the Maumee. We were instantly best friends. We're still friends. They don't even reenact anymore. We're just lifelong friends. It was just like that. But that first event, I was hooked. And I just kept with it. And did the war correspondent thing for years and years as it grew.
That's how I think that was what I remember you doing. The gap I first met you at was the war coverage thing. And you had the period camera, you had the whole 9 yards. In fact, I think Dad, when he retired from going out in the field, I think you gave a lot of your research that he ponied off of that for his.
Yeah, I talked to him a lot.
Yep. So I guess in the collecting is what the living history and the collecting kind of go hand in hand. I'm sure you've seen some definite changes in the market over doing this for 20 plus years.
Oh yeah. So when I started, I could pick up like wax skirts and things for $25. They certainly don't cost that anymore, especially not if it's in a wearable size. Now, like some of the stuff behind me, when I see what people are paying for it now, I got it, 20 years ago, and now what it sells for blows my mind. I definitely got in ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and I'm thankful for that. But it's evolved for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, you talk about, 90, I got in this in 2003, and I can remember that number one, there were very few women in the hobby to start with, and even fewer that were doing it beyond dressing up to hang out with their boyfriend for the weekend. And the women's stuff was one of those things where it was kind of hit or miss, because there weren't too many people collecting it, but the ones that were collecting it were really, really knew their stuff and were a wealth of knowledge. And it thankfully has gotten more. I'm glad to see it's gotten more popular as the years have gone by.
Yeah, there was not a lot of resources available either, because that was the early days of the internet. So we didn't have a lot of ability to communicate. There was only a few published books, and they were small publications, so it was hard to get your hands on them. You had to use interlibrary loan, or you had to buy them, and they're prohibitively expensive.
Oh yeah.
I have it on my shelf, but now I can't remember what it's called. The first ones were Dress for Duty. And Dress for Duty, yes. The second edition, I remember when it came out and getting the first edition of Dress for Duty Volume 2 and just poring over it and being like, this is the best thing ever. And that was probably 2002, 2003. And now it's so dated. We've learned so much more even since that was published.
It's like Ingram and Braley's British Women in Military Service that they did for the military magazine press. When Diana got into doing Brit, that was the guidebook. And it gets same thing. That came out mid-90s, and we've learned a ton over the years from that. So enough with us going down memory lane, because if I know myself, if I just sit here and go follow my little bunny trails, we'll be here all night. So let's start with the basics. We're here to talk about the waves in the USMC Women's Reserve. Can you give the audience a kind of a Reader's Digest version of how both these services come into being and their basic histories?
Okay. So in World War I, there were the various auxiliaries that were brought into being, the Yeomanettes and the Marinettes. They were classified as Navy Reservists F and Marines F for female. They were not any rank. They were not really Marines. They were not really yeoman or Navy seamen or anything. They were just this other thing that was out there. They existed, but they weren't an actual part of the service. So that was the birthplace of both of these services. They were completely disbanded after the war, as soon as it ended, and never thought of again, essentially, by either branch of service. Then World War II breaks out, and the Army brings up the WACs. And Eleanor Roosevelt is all about this. She loves the WACs. She's all about the Navy to do this. She wants the Marines to do this. She wants the Coast Guard to do this. Everybody needs to do this. And some other women stepped forward to help her with the various services. One of the ones I thought was really interesting, and I'm going to get her name right if I don't pull it up. For the WAC, the big proponent was an Asian aviatrix by the name of Margaret Chung. So she's really helps push with the Navy. She was a Navy to get the women involved there. And on July 20th, and this is where Navy and Marines path starts and where it ends together pretty much, because they went very separate ways from this point. July 20th, 1943, a bill is passed in the House to get both branches started of women's reserves. And that's pretty much it. The Navy is all about it. They're like, okay, we're going to do this. Yay. The Marines, however, are reluctant. So the Navy starts right away training, bringing women on board into various roles, mostly clerical, but also heavily into their aviation field, largely due to Margaret Chung and her influence. Let's see, what else did I get jotted down here? Mildred McAfee was from Wellesley College, and she becomes the first reserve officer for the Waves and first naval officer ever. The specifications that I thought were very interesting for the Waves was they had to be basically 20 to 50 to serve either as an officer or as an enlisted woman. But then when you flip over to the Marines for enlisted, you had to be 20 to 35 or 45. But then for the officers, you could be up to 50. So the Marines had a lower age range for their enlisted service, but their education level, you just had to have some high school for the Marines, but you had to have completed it for the Navy. Again, that seems very typical of both branches.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
Yeah. Younger, less educated for the Marines, more educated, older for the Navy.
Real quick, one of the things that sticks out to me is it's such a wide range of age. It's not, I mean, nowadays, if you were to try to go down to a recruiting office, unless you had some kind of really secret, awesome skill over the age of 30, they're not going to look at you unless we're in the middle of a shooting war. And here we you know, granted, the manpower crunch is there, but taking them all the way up to 50 that is not what I would have expected to hear.
Well, they were looking at mostly clerical work. So they're thinking of people to operate punch hole machines for cataloging and, you know, take notes, secretaries for officers. They weren't thinking necessarily immediately about all the places they did end up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I'm getting back to the evolution of these. We have the Navy right off the bat going down and getting running. Marines are much slower. And they take a bit longer. They did not start training for a full year.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of obstinates involved in that. And there's a lot of things. So the Navy has their cute little anagram. The WACs have theirs. The SPARs have, the Coast Guard has theirs. The Marines are like, no, they're not going to, if you're going to have to take women, they're going to be Marines. We're not going to call them anything. They are going to be Marines, by God, and that's it. So that's what they were. They were women Marine reservists. If you ever hear them called BAMs or WAMs, that's a abbreviation for broad-assed Marine or wide-assed Marine. And the ongoing joke is that you can fit 12 men on the bench in the back of a deuce and a half, but only 10 women. And that's how that nickname got earned.
God. Again, I'm not surprised with it being the Marine Corps.
Yeah. But the Marines did eventually start training officers at Mount Holyoke. And they did pull some wave officers into their initial cadre to start off. And their initial, the lead officer was Colonel Ruth Streeter.
Okay.
And she was older, but she was a very standout, take action, take no guff kind of woman.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed that kind of figure to get going. The early classes trained there as well, the enlisted classes, but they eventually moved to still a base. It's the big one.
Lejeune?
They did not go to Paris Island.
They go to Camp Lejeune or
Lejeune.
Okay.
They went to Camp Lejeune. Their barracks are still standing at Lejeune.
Wow.
Which also doesn't surprise anyone, I think. They're probably still using them.
Yeah.
Not much modified. But that was a big deal for them to make that move to Lejeune.
It's almost like being finally accepted into the club.
In a lot of ways, it was.
Yeah.
The Waves continued to train at it was a college in the Bronx. Oh. I am not good with dates and bases.
Don't feel bad.
But all the Waves trained at this college in the Bronx. Enlisted and officers. And that was another big difference between the Waves and the Marines. And it was sort of a thing with the enlisted personnel. They trained at a Marine base.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't train at college.
Yeah, that's again, but like we've been talking about, totally in keeping with the culture of both organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The Navy brought in a fashion designer to design their lovely uniform behind me, but we can get into that more when we start talking about the uniforms.
Yeah, because I think that's a key piece of the story. The thing that strikes me too is how late they finally, okay, guys, the war's almost over. Do we actually want to act on this, this order to create these services? The Navy jumps on it a little bit sooner than the Marine Corps does, but it almost strikes me as like they probably didn't have a whole lot of female Marines trained by the time the war ended.
The Marine Corps Women's Reserves was the second smallest next to only the SPARs.
Okay. All right.
The officer pool was actually quite small.
I bet. So the Navy's bringing in women for combat, to free men up for shipboard posting, forward posting overseas. What
Not
kind of
shipboard.
jobs? Or shipboard, yes. What kind of jobs are women doing in the Navy?
In the Navy, it was predominantly clerical.
Okay.
I saw a note that was almost like 63% clerical, but then the other largest chunk was aviation mechanics, aviation controls work, running the airfields, running the towers, just everything that could possibly do. Packing chutes, they're riggers. Lots of riggers for the flyers. They're packing the pilot chutes and the crew chutes. Okay. They were doing training stuff. And then the other things was just like random assorted thing, cooks and base support kind of stuff. Checking people in and out in San Diego and all the ports of call. They were running embarkation ports. But the most fascinating thing and the standout thing for me that the Waves did that I don't know of any other branch of service, and Molly will probably jump down my throat if I'm wrong about this, is they did so much decrypting and decoding.
Really?
They worked with the stateside bombs that broke and were decoding the Enigma codes and everything. Huh. They worked with decoding and deciphering purple on the Pacific side. They did a lot of decryption work. And I found that fascinating that would fall to the Navy and to the Waves.
That's very fascinating. Did they ever send any of them overseas, or were they strictly stateside?
The only overseas postings that the Waves saw were Alaska and Hawaii.
Okay, yep. Because those are still U.S. territories at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we kind of talked about this earlier, and I think you already answered my question, which was going to be basically these are both very conservative organizations. Was one more eager to employ women over the other? And it sounds like from what we've discussed up to this point, the Navy tended to seem to jump on it a little bit quicker and be a little bit more enthusiastic about it than the Marine Corps did.
The Navy was more enthusiastic to jump on it, but the Marine Corps became a better environment.
Okay.
Which is interesting how it played out, because the Marines went in treating them as Marines and just saying not treating them any differently initially. I mean, other than like physical standards and separating them and that kind of way. They just approached them very even-handedly, with very few exceptions made for them. The men eventually accepted them more than the Navy men did.
Mm-hmm.
There were still issues, but they were not. They were green. They were seen as Marines, more or less, by a majority of the Corps.
And again,
waves, they weren't Navy.
And again, looking at the culture of the Marine Corps, none of that really surprises me. I mean, granted, the gender thing does, 80 years ago, yeah, it's going to be a factor, but the idea that everyone's a Marine, that doesn't shock me at all.
Yeah.
So let's talk uniforms. And I think you were getting ready to bring up one of my favorite factoids about the WAVES uniform. What's the basic service uniform for the WAVES? And what are some of the seasonal stuff that they have?
Okay. So the Navy saw and heard all the criticisms of the WAC uniforms and what an utter failure they were, because they were considered ugly and an utter failure and frumpy and dowdy. So they brought in a New York fashion designer, Manbacher, to design their uniforms for them. And this blue uniform back here, which I don't know if there's enough light to see, was considered one of the more stylish. This is the winter dress for enlisted, with the dark blue shirt, the reserve blue tie, and the blue jacket and the purse. Now, that was just for enlisted. And there's this whole magic grid that you have to follow in the guide to when you wear the white shirt versus when you wear the blue shirt, and when you wear the black tie versus when you wear the blue tie. It's science. I don't know. You have to follow it and run the chart.
Yeah.
So this is the general winter dress. It's not high dress. It's just general. It's a good bet. As long as you're not going to a wedding or high mass, turning around 3 times or something. Now, this is the standard summer. It doesn't change, thankfully. This is enlisted summer dress. It's a seersucker dress and a work dress. It was also supposed to be a work uniform. The jacket was for dress purposes. They also would use the blues for high dress with a white shirt. They also had a set of whites that they could use, but those were an optional purchase.
Really? I would have thought the seersucker would have been optional and the whites would have been mandatory, just knowing how the Navy loves its summer and winter uniforms.
No, the seersuckers were mandatory because it was also supposed to double as a work uniform and be a duty uniform. And then the whites were optional.
Wow.
And you had to purchase them yourself. The Navy and the Marine Corps both did something differently than the WAC did with how you obtained your uniforms. You paid for them out of your own money, out of your own pay. Some of them were available and issued to you, but you still purchased them and owned them.
That was like officer's clothing.
Yes. So you'll see a higher level of tailoring in WAVES clothing. You'll see a lot more designer, private purchase tags.
Interesting.
They did not have the same supply, and there were not the same numbers as the WAC did.
Yeah. When you have less people to clothe, you can take your time being a little bit more, getting that right fit, getting that nice polished look. So that's definitely going to impact it. And they and of course the cap. Tell us a little bit about the hat. I've always thought that's one of the coolest women's services.
Yes, the hats are really cool. The Navy has one hat, but then you get 3 different tops to go with it that snap in and out so that you can change it up for the seasons. I have the seersucker summer top on. There's a white top to go with the white shirt, and there's a dark blue one to go with the dark blue shirts, which is subject to the same grids that I was talking about of magic science of what to wear when.
With the cap tally, right?
Yes.
The soap cap tally.
And you can see I have the back rolled. This is how the women wore it, rolled and high up in the front.
Okay. You have women. So I know the seersuckers will work uniform in a summer uniform, but you have a lot of women in the aviation field. Are they issuing them anything specific for fatigue or dirty work, or are they just getting dungarees in really small sizes?
So the Navy came up with a horrific set of coveralls that disappeared very quickly. They were drawstring ankles and sleeves, and they were not flattering. And then they came up with a converted style of men's dungarees, which were a navy blue and chambray shirt, just like the men's, but fit for a woman. And those were very popular. Supply was an issue, so you will see women wearing men's dungarees as well.
Okay.
Especially early on when they were trying to avoid having to wear the blue balloon suit.
That almost sounds like something you would give a prison inmate with the drawstring cuffs and sleeves and all that.
Except it was poofy too.
Oh, even better. That's just fantastic.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So let's jot over to the green side of things. What's the Marine uniform look like? What's that consist of?
The Marines did not hire a designer, but they did get a fashion expert involved, and that it was also then subject to the men. Where the Marines differ from the Navy is the Marines wanted the uniforms to look as close to the men's uniform as possible when it came to the greens. So they did everything. There's even the chevrons on the sleeves. I don't know if you could see that, but they made it to the men's style as much as possible. And because they were such an emphasis on focus, their fashion expert, some of the first people that they hired and became Marines became tailors. That was their MOS.
Wow. Okay.
And the fashion expert actually became a woman Marine because she liked the uniform so much that she designed. But the tailors...
It's probably my favorite. It's from someone that works with clothing. It probably is the most aesthetically pleasing of all the U.S. women's services stuff.
I like the 3-button simplicity and the way it hangs when it's fitted, right? But it's almost impossible to find one that fits you because when these were given to the woman, they had to buy them right off the line as they were running through it in basic. And as they were given it, they then finished the line where they're getting all their stuff. They put it on and they stepped on a platform and it was tailored on them before they even head out the door.
That is very interesting. And that's almost a European way of doing it.
I read 2 accounts and both women commented on that specifically, that their uniforms were tailored before they were even out the door.
Wow. I'm just going over my head. The logistics of doing that makes my head explode.
Yeah. Well, just think about how long that line was.
Oh, yeah.
That's why they had 13 of them. And like these little pockets up here, they take notes about how they would have them on Bustier Girls, they would sew them shut and have to do different things just to adjust different things. So it wouldn't, because they're that picky about how things finished and looked and laid.
Wow. So you've got the reed greens for kind of the fall, more cooler temperatures. Did they have a summer uniform?
They did. They had a spruce green summer seersucker uniform. It's striped just like this, but instead of the blue, you have a sprucey green color, and it was a short sleeve. It's really cute. I wear one pretty often. It has spruce green buttons, very comfortable, very lightweight, easy to wear. It was both a work and a dress uniform. You had to change the buttons and the insignia out and your shoes to switch it from dress to work. And you wore different hats with each. And again, that's got the same kind of grid as the Navy had going on in the regulations. So if for dress, you have the white shoes with the gold insignia here and on your hat and on the bell hat, which this is a bell hat. So is this. But then if you're wearing it for work, you have the black insignia with your brown shoes and the black insignia here. You have to change. You're not wearing the bell hat. You're wearing the Daisy May or the side cap.
I thought compared to the Red Army that the WAC stuff was challenging to figure out what was worn when. This takes the cake.
We haven't gotten into work uniforms and
that was my next
exercise
question.
uniforms with the Marines. They never got their stuff together when it came to that.
So that's going to be a nice segue into my next question, which was working attire.
Well, I would like to address the dress whites real quick.
Oh, hold on. We skipped one.
So this was voted the most attractive uniform of World War II. I'm going to move better. And was considered the #1 recruiting tool of the Marine Corps. It is the dress whites with the gold buttons down the front. It was an optional uniform. It's a light cotton. And there are many, many pictures of WRs getting married in this uniform. They would buy it specifically if they were getting married to wear it. It was loved. And
I can see why.
It was an optional purchase.
What about the mint green hat that's with it?
Yeah, that's the summer hat.
Okay, I'm tracking now.
So this is the summer bell hat, and they're all smushed because they all got smushed in bags. They used to actually take sanitary napkins and roll them up and sew them into the crown to keep them up. So
inventive, I like that. So
yeah. This is the summer cover for the purse. Because you have to make sure your purse matches everything as well.
Hold on a minute. So the purse has to match everything as well. There isn't just one, like in the Army, there isn't just one brown.
Yeah, no, the purse has to match. And same with the Navy. So the black purse is okay to wear with the blue uniform. But if you're wearing the summer uniform, you have to put the white cover over it.
Wow.
And if you're in the Navy, you have to wear the purse from your right shoulder across your body onto your left hip. And if you're in the Marines, you cannot wear it across your body because that distracts from the lines of your uniform. So you have to wear it on your left shoulder straight down. This frees up your right arm to salute properly.
Just to indulge me, did the WAC have a prescribed manner for wearing the purse?
Yeah, you could wear it, I believe. Well, you could definitely wear it across your body on your left hip.
Okay.
But I believe you could also wear it straight down the left side if you wished.
Okay. Wow. So you said the seersucker was kind of like the Navy. It was a summer service, but could also double as a work uniform.
Yeah.
Utilities, coveralls, that kind of thing. I'm assuming they developed those as well.
They were a disaster for the Marine Corps. They struggled with this. So I'm wearing women's pattern HBTs. That was the first attempt. They could not get them out there to supply. And then if they could, there was a lot of flaws. So then the women would reject them, but they still needed them for their duty. So they would wear the men's HBTs, which were much better fitting. Then they came out with the overall uniform, which is just a pair of light green sateen overalls with a little jacket that goes over it and a t-shirt and a really horrific hat. That's a green Dixie cup, essentially. But the problem with those is they button straight up the back. So if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to have somebody else unbutton you, which wasn't very convenient. At the end of the war, they moved the buttons to the side, which was helpful, but these things were still incredibly lightweight and really were not durable enough for a lot of the jobs that the Marines then had these women doing, because the Marines were throwing these women into everything. The Marines were having these women in armor, be armorers. They had them doing all sorts of aviation work. They had them driving trucks. They had them all over munitions and armories. I thought that was fascinating. They're one of the only branches of service that really put them in those roles.
That is interesting.
It's one of the only branches of service where you will hear women say that they qualified. And at first, when I first started researching Marines, I was confused. And I thought, well, that makes sense. Every Marine's a rifleman. But they didn't qualify in basic. They qualified when they went into their specialties. Because they had to in order to check the weapons they were working on.
You got to know what you're working on.
Mm-hmm. So some of them were qualified on 50 cals. Whatever that looks like.
So the Marine, and so because I've seen photos of the overalls. They just, I used to think they were made out of like the HBT material. I've never had a
No,
chance to examine one up close. Sateen, yeah, that's a horrible choice for doing anything
and
that's
it's not
supposed
as
to hold
heavy
up.
as like the men's 43 jacket, Army 43 jacket sateen. It's much lighter even than that.
Yeah, so that's gonna
It's almost a poplin.
yeah, that was what I was trying to put my finger on. Was yeah, wow, that's a horrible choice for working wear.
Mm-hmm.
What
They
about
didn't hold up very well. They felt it's like kept going back to men's HBTs. And by the end of the war, you will still see the overalls into Korea, but you will also see men's HBTs. And because of supply issues, things vary greatly base to base. What people wore at Cherry Point is not what they wore at El Toro. What they wore at El Toro might not even be what they wore at San Diego. And Quantico, with the largest amount of Marines, women Marines, would be completely different than, say, Lejeune. So it was wild. In a lot of the different bases, the different commandants or whoever was running the base would have different feelings about what people should be wearing and how they should be wearing it and put out their own rules. Whereas the Navy and the Army was often much more blanket.
yeah, these are the regulations. They will be, they apply it anywhere you go. So what about cosmetics and hairstyles? I'm assuming there are rules and regs for that as well.
Yeah, you had to do everything very conservatively. Dyeing hair wasn't really encouraged because you were not allowed to let your roots show. So if you wanted to dye your hair, you'd have to keep it up, and you weren't really given time for that. Makeup was a big thing. They wanted you. One of the biggest fears of all the armed services was that they would be turning the women into lesbians. So you had to look feminine at all possible, whenever possible, even if you're driving a truck. So that was a huge emphasis. If you could get makeup that would stick, great. If it would run and look messy, that was not so great. But clean, fresh, that was what they wanted you to go for.
Even on work detail.
Even on work detail, yeah. The Marine Corps was especially picky, again, with their obsession with look. And in the regulations, it actually stipulates that if you are wearing lipstick, it has to, or nail polish, it must match the braid on this hat, which is that red. As you can see, my lipstick matches that braid.
Yep. It just strikes me, because that's so much of my research into women's stuff has been in the Red Army. None of this even factors into the equation. They're lucky to get female uniforms issued to them when they get to Berlin. And here we have the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps you got to get the Ouija board out there to figure out what to wear when, and the makeup, you got to wear that during a working detail. It blows my mind that even in the height of war, the services were still worrying about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were trying. Well, you also have to think of how much the power of production that the U.S. had, that they were able to worry about what the women's cosmetics looked like.
Yeah.
Just the mass scale of American production at that point. Just we're full wartime economy, but we're still worried about what the WACs are, or the WRs have on their face.
Yeah. Versus you look at, like, I can remember when Ludmila Plevchenko got one of her, I think it was Order of Lenin or Order of the Red Banner. She talks about getting perfume. And this was a huge thing because she had only ever heard of perfume reading magazines and talking about, hearing it in the department stores in Moscow. And she actually gets handed a bottle. And that was worth its weight in gold. Mm-hmm. Yet over here, we're passing it out like candy.
Yeah.
Wow. So what about undergarments? This is one that every time I do a women's service talk, and when it comes to uniforms, everyone wants to know about undergarments. Were there issued undergarments, or was this another one of those?
They had to purchase them on their own.
Okay.
Now the WAC did have issue undergarments, but they did not in the Marine Corps. They did not have They did not have the distribution for it.
Yeah, they couldn't even get workwear right.
Prescribed what they said you should wear and gave you recommendations. the Waves do as well and guide right. And they recommend the worst kind of stocking. So they wanted women wearing cotton lisle, which is horrific. It's heavy, it's thick, it bunches up, and it itches. And it's not warm either. If it's cold out, it's going to make you colder. It's not great. You could wear cotton lisle rayon blend. You could wear rayon. They didn't like it, but they wanted you wearing cotton lisle, both services.
Wow. And
in one account, with the summer uniforms at one base, and I want to say it was Lejeune, one of the base combat officers heads wanted them wearing white cotton lisle with their summer uniforms. So even uglier.
That is because that is absolutely that must be one of Dante's levels of hell, because having to wear that in Lejeune in the summer is just absolutely miserable.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, because what little rooting or footing I have in American women's stuff is predominantly U.S. Army, and one of the things that it seems so popular is the seersucker athletic suit. Did the Navy and the Marine Corps have PT wear for these guys for their female personnel, or how does that work?
The Navy had PT wear. They even had a swimsuit. I don't know as much about it as I do about the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I believe they had a light blue chambray romper with a skirt. I have not found as much documentation on that. But the Marine Corps had several because, again, they couldn't figure this out. They started with what was almost a duplicate of the WACs, which was a green and white seersucker dress and shorts. And it is almost, I've laid two of them next to each other. It is almost verbatim an exact copy. And then they evolved next to the infamous peanut suit, which is solid tan, crinkly seersucker with romper with a skirt around the waist and drawstring shorts. And you literally look like a peanut in it without the skirt on it. And it's terrible. And every single example I've ever seen of it has had the drawstrings ripped out of the legs.
Really?
I think that's the only way to make it tolerable to wear.
Okay.
Because it would have been both uncomfortable and ugly. It was hated, and it was quickly discontinued, and they attempted to replace it with another poplin uniform, which was not much better. It was a set of green culottes and a short sleeve poplin button down. Yeah.
I've never even seen this, and that sounds hideous.
Oh, yeah. And it would not have been very comfortable, especially if you're exercising.
I wouldn't think so. One other thing, didn't both the Navy and the Marine Corps have like gloves that went with the uniforms as well? Like
private purchase. You purchased your gloves privately as well. The Navy wanted black with the blue uniform, unless you were wearing a white shirt. That was part of that. And then Marines just always wanted white or doeskin.
Okay. So I'm actually at the last of my one of my last of my questions, which is footwear. What's footwear looking like for these services?
This is the basic issue pump. I'm not sure what it looks like to you, but it's the same for the Navy and the Marine Corps. This one is Marine Corps. It has the stamp inside. It's brown, and it's very practical. They got worn after the war. This is the other style, and it is got a little bow on it. A lot of women hated the bow and cut the bows off.
Okay.
They also had an Oxford like the WAC and a low shoe and boots. Now, the Marine Corps never really got their boots out well, so a lot of women ended up wearing men's boondockers.
That was going to be my question, as to whether they just issued them out small boondockers, but
they really did. They just gave them boondockers because it was easier. And the shoes, the heels, they just went and bought a lot. You'll see, especially in the Navy, you'll see a lot of non-issue black Oxfords and black heels because it was just easier.
Yeah.
And the supply just wasn't there for it.
It seems like the Army, compared to the Marine Corps and the Navy, seemed at least, I mean, it's not perfect, but it seems like they had, at least when it came to clothing women, they had a little bit more of a rhyme and reason to doing things.
There was a lot more of them, and the Army Nurse Corps were almost the exact same thing as the WACs. So they produced a lot more of that way, and that made it easier. That's why they had issue underwear, is because the whole Army Nurse Corps was wearing the same underwear as the whole WAC.
Makes sense.
And the same shoes. When you have that much more, it's easier to produce in mass.
Yeah, I find this utterly fascinating. This on so many levels, because they're such a small service, and they've got it just, when you the fact that we need a grid chart to lay out what to wear when is just, that blows my mind. So we will. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions, because we're almost at our. We're working kind of close to our 1 hour limit. I don't want to take up too much of your time this evening.
I'm good.
So do we have any good? Oh, overseas caps. I've noticed that I see both the Marine Corps and the women have a version of the overseas cap. When does that come in to being?
So when they're wearing the men's uniforms, they started making these. Little customized overseas cap to distinguish them from the men and get something personalized anyway. After that, you start seeing them creep out in 44, and that was a big way to set the summer seersucker aside from separated from work to dress, is to wear the side cap instead of the Daisy May, which is not all that well liked by the women. They'd rather wear the side cap.
The Daisy May for women, it has a little shorter brim on it than the male one, right?
Mm-hmm. It's very similar in shape to this.
Ah, okay.
And they would wear it like this with the back turned up and a big old black EGA on the front.
Okay. Did the Navy ever get side caps?
Yes. Actually, that's what I have with my.
Oh, look at that.
And again, those start showing up in 44. It's a convenience thing. It's something coming back from overseas too.
Yeah.
The whole fashion trend was to look more like somebody coming from overseas.
Wow. I'm just kind of shaking my head at just the vast number of combinations involved. So we have a question for you. Ashley wants to know if making the stockings cotton lisle, was that a fire safety thing, or was this just what they thought was the most uniform and what they should wear?
It's what they thought was the easiest to get and the least likely to deplete men's stuff and what men needed. They thought silk would look indulgent. They thought in guide right, they explain exactly why they would prefer cotton lisle. They thought the rayon might be too thin and not hold up. They thought that the cotton lisle would have less risk of runs, which would be untidy.
Yeah.
So they thought it would be tougher.
What, just out of curiosity, what did the Army make their stockings out of?
They use anything pretty much in the Army, from what Molly and I have talked about. For Army, I wear a cotton and rayon blend.
Okay. I was curious if that kind of.
They had issue stockings, though.
Okay. That stands to reason. All right. We got any other questions coming in? We got a few people. While we're waiting for the peanut gallery to come to throw you another question, what are some good books for just an overall, just for people that are interested in the waves and their in the Marines service during the war? What are some good titles to try and find?
So copies of Guide Right are not actually that hard to come by, and it's kind of a must. It's the service manual. It's basically the woman's blue jacket manual, and it tells you everything you need to know. And it was republished a couple times, which is why it's not too hard to find. And then Mother's was, I have a couple of them back here. This is a really good account. Mother was a gunner's mate. It's a woman retelling her mother's story as she served, and she ended up actually an armorman as well, or armorers during the war.
Wow.
Pretty good. Talking about the waves. For Marines, there's really only two accounts out right now, and it's Teresa it's the book's name is Woman Marine, but her last name is something very unpronounceable in Polish, and she was at Quantico, and she had a very interesting time there, and she talks very frankly about her time there, which I appreciate. Inga Fredrickson is the other woman Marine, and she was at El Toro, and she wrote A Few Good Women is the name of it. Yeah, and it's another excellent, and she also talks very frankly about her experience in the service. And both of these women on opposite sides of the country experienced some horrific sexual harassment, and near misses with some very aggressive men, but still the way that they were treated was on par for the time, and the way they came out of the whole service experience, though, they still loved it. They still came out with this attitude that they would have totally done it again. And they also came out feeling very much like Marines, like they had been accepted by the Corps in the end.
That's very interesting. Now I've got to go pick a copy of that, because like I said, I didn't even know there were any accounts out there. I figured that the female portion of the Marine Corps was so small and so just kind of an afterthought almost. But now I'm just gonna pick that up. We have another question for you. We have one
in publication because Matt has put them on his reading list.
Really?
Yeah, for all women officers. So they're in republication. They're out.
Okay. All right. I'll be hitting Amazon later. We have a SoCal WAC reenactor who wants to know if the Women's Reserve or the Waves, if they had a private purchase off-duty dress.
Well, yeah, the white or an off-duty dress. No, they did not. Not like the WACs, not like the nurses.
Okay.
The closest thing I can think of would be going out in the seersuckers, or that's basically what they used in the summer as an off-duty dress. And then in the winter, it would be Class Bs. But you had to go out with your jacket. The Marines, if you were out off base, you had to go off in your jacket, full buttons to the nines. The Navy was very similar. They're so fixated on looks.
Wow.
They didn't have off-duty dresses because they were all about that look. And using it as a recruiting tool.
Yeah, and furthering that service's image in the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes. We got any more? Laura wants to know if you can send her the reading list when we get done.
Sure.
All right.
I can send her a whole reading list. I can bury her with books.
And she will go and buy every single one of them. This is probably in the top 3 talks of that we've done. This has been really, really awesome information. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come in and talk to us.
Can I tell a real quick story from my research I found?
Please.
So I got a grouping and it was named, and I started researching it, and I dug into it a little bit, and I kept finding this woman's father's name over and over again, but not hers. And I kept finding his name because he was a Marine Corps chaplain, and he was the Marine Corps chaplain at Belleau Wood. And she enlisted because of him and his service. So this was this legacy. And that was the legacy that came from that. So we have the daughter of the chaplain, Marine Corps chaplain at Belleau Wood, then becoming a Marine on her own right.
Wow, that is a very cool legacy.
And here's your picture.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
That's great. I guess, well, now that since I've got you and Laura here, I guess now I was saving this for later, but I'll give you a little of the sneak peek. I have the first 50 yards of dealer sample of each of the 2 WAC wools that I've had run coming in from the mill. They are somewhere between my mill and here. So I will have those in sometime next week, and we'll do a big unveiling and see how almost a year's worth of back and forth and banging my head against the wall has paid off. I saw the first ones were really, really good. So after putting some tweaks in, I really think we got something good that I hope to share with you guys when it comes in.
Okay, sounds good.
So, well, if no one else has anything, last up, we're going to do the last one. And again, I got to be honest with you, that's the one I think is going to be the most interesting is the roundtable of women in the hobby. We've got 6 or 8, I can't remember, folks coming on that we're going to do a roundtable on how things have changed, how things, things that they've noticed, trends, that kind of thing. And that'll be next Tuesday at 8. So please tune in. For folks that may have came in on the end of this show, if you didn't catch the whole thing, go over to YouTube. You can pick it up there. It'll be on the Women's History playlist. So until next time, thanks for joining us, and I will see you later.
Thank you.